Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajakacharya Ashtottara Shata Shishimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajakacharya Ashtottara Shata Shishimad His Divine Grace Śrimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrind Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरी गोवर्धन की। वृंदावन धाम मथुरा धाम की। नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की। जगन्नाथपुरी क्षेत्र धाम की। गंगमय यमुनमाय की। तुलसी देवी भक्ति देवी की। सामवेद भक्त वृंद की। Go Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Narang Chaiva Narottamam Deving Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayet. Nashtaprayeshva bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavate uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. Hare Krishna. Welcome to today's Śrimad Bhāgavatam class. Today we'll be speaking on verses 6 to verse 14 of the 17th chapter of the 3rd canto, titled Hiranyaksha's Victory of Hiranyaksha over over all the directions of the universe. So, because it's a lot of verses, we'll chant all the Sanskrit together first, from 6 to 14, and then we'll recite the English, and then we'll do the 14th verse together. Uddhasattatit ambodha ghataya nashtabhagane vyomni pravishta tamasa nasmadvyadrashyate padam. Chukrosha vimanavardhir udhurmi shutribhot shubhito daraha sodapanascha charitas chukshubhu sukshapanjakaha muhu paridhyo bhuvam saravo shasi suryayo nirghata rata nirhada vivarebhyah prajajnire antargrameshu mukhato vamantyo vahnim ulbanam Shrigaloluka tankarai pranidura shivang shivaha Sangitavad rodanavad unnamaya shirodharam Vyamuncham vividhavacho gramasinghastatastaha Kharascha karkashay kshatta Kurairgnanto dharatalam Khara ravasa matta Paryadhavam varutashaha Rudanto rasabhatrasta nidadu udapatam khagaha Ghosheranye cha pashava sakrin mutram akurvata Gavotrasam asigridohas toyadah puya varshinaha Vyarudandeva lingani drumaha petur vinanilam Grahan punyatamanganye bhaganang chapi dipitaha Aticherur vakragatya yudhuscha parasparam. Now we'll do the English. The luminaries in the heavens were screened by masses of clouds in which lightning sometimes flashed as though... Oh, right. Sorry. The luminaries in the heavens were screened by masses of clouds in which lightning sometimes flashed as though laughing. Darkness reigned everywhere, and nothing could be seen. The ocean with its high waves wailed aloud as if stricken with sorrow, and there was a commotion among the creatures inhabiting the ocean. The rivers and lakes were also agitated, and lotuses withered. Misty halos appeared around the sun and the moon during solar and lunar eclipses, again and again. Claps of thunder were heard even without clouds, and sounds like those of rattling chariots emerged from the mountain caves. In the interior of the villages, she-jackals yelled portentously, vomiting strong fire from their mouths, and jackals and owls also joined them with their cries. Raising their necks, dogs cried here and there, now in the manner of singing, and now of wailing. O Vidura, the asses ran hither and thither in herds, striking the earth with their hard hoofs and wildly braying. Frightened by the braying of the asses, birds flew shrieking from their nests, while cattle in the cowsheds as well as in the woods passed dung and urine. Cows, terrified, yielded blood in place of milk, clouds rained pus, the images of the gods in the temple shed tears, and trees fell down without a blast of wind. Ominous planets such as Mars and Saturn shone brighter and surpassed the auspicious ones such as Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus, as well as a number of lunar mansions. Taking seemingly retrograde courses, the planets came in conflict with one another. And now we'll do the 14th verse together. Grahan punyatamang anye. Grahan punyat. Oh my God, I keep forgetting. Should have just done one verse. Grahan punyatamam anye. Grahan punyatamang anye. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Aticherur vakragatya. Aticherur vakragatya. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Grahan punyatamang anye. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Aticherur vakragatya. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Grahan punyatamam anye. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Aticherur vakragatya. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Please chant. Grahan punyatamam anye. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Aticherur vakragatya. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Grahan punyatamam anye. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Aticherur vakragatya. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Grahan punyatamam anye. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Aticherur vakragatya. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Grahan punyatamam anye. Bhaganang chapi dipitaha. Aticherur vakragatya. Yuyudhuscha parasparam. Mataji, you want to try? Okay. Grahan, planets. Punyataman, most auspicious. Anye, others. The ominous planets. Bhaganan, luminaries. Cha, and. Api, also. Dipitaha, illuminating. Aticheru, overlapped. Vakragatya, taking retrograde courses. Yuduhu, came into conflict. Cha, and. Paraha param, with one and another. Translation. Ominous planets such as Mars and Saturn shone brighter and surpassed the auspicious ones such as Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus, as well as a number of lunar mansions. Taking seemingly retrograde courses, the planets came in conflict with one another. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The entire universe is moving under the three modes of material nature. Those living entities who are in goodness are called the pious species, pious lands, pious trees, etc. It is similar with the planets also. Many planets are considered pious and others are considered impious. Saturn and Mars are considered impious. When the pious planets shine very brightly, it is an auspicious sign. But when the inauspicious planets shine very brightly, this is not a very good sign. Om Ajnanatimmirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitayena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalang Shri Rupang Shri Guru Shri Vaishnavang Cha Shri Rupam Sakrajatang Sahagana Raghunatham Vitang Tang Sajivam Sadvetam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padang Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhang Vitang Cha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Grahan punyatamananye bhaganang chapi deepitaha aticherur vakragatya yuyudhuscha parasparam. Ominous planets such as Mars and Saturn shone brighter and surpassed the auspicious ones such as Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus, as well as a number of lunar mansions. Taking seemingly retrograde courses, the planets came in conflict with one another. So, before I start speaking on this verse, I would like to get all the blessings of all the Vaishnavas assembled here, so I may speak something in the line of Shastra. And please, Shri Radha Govinda and His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna Maharaj. So, so the 9 verses that we just recited, or the ones that I recited, they show if you chant them in the proper meter and if you chant them in the proper melodies and proper tunes, the ragas, whatever, it will sound like a very good piece of poetry, or if you sing it properly, then it will sound like a good piece of music. And it just shows how interesting Sanskrit verses are, especially in the Bhagavatam. Like they have such nice ornaments, also called alankars, and they have the ragas, if you know how to chant them and sing them in the ragas. So this is the quality of scriptures, that they can be sang in and chanted in different meters and tones. But these topics that I just spoke about, like the ornaments, the meters, the poetry, and all these things, these are the topics that mostly materialistic people, or the atheists, the rationalists, the agnostics, all these kinds of people, these are the things that they focus on. But they will not understand the deep point of of these verses. They will just simply look at the exteriors, the outer beauty of these verses, and they'll eventually consider that, this is nice poetry, but it must be imagination, because something cannot be so so well described, and it cannot be true at the same time. They'll write essays and they'll give their own interpretations on these verses based on where they are in the yogic process, but they'll simply miss the essence. They'll miss the main point, and they will not understand that the main point of the verses in Śrimad Bhāgavatam and other scriptures, Puranas, Itihasas, Mahabharata, the Vedas, it is to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vedeshcha savedaham eva vedya, Vedanta krit vedavid eva chaham. The point of all the Vedas and scriptures is to know me. That's what Krishna says in the 15th chapter. So devotees, they understand the essence, they understand the point of the verses in Śrimad Bhāgavatam and other scriptures. They understand that Śrimad Bhāgavatam is not just poetry, there's more to it. They understand that Śrimad Bhāgavatam is a literary expansion of Krishna, and it is spoken by a pure devotee of Krishna to another pure devotee of Krishna, and it's written by the literary incarnation of Krishna himself. So, by Vasudev, Srila Vasudev. So it's not something that is concocted out of their minds. Srila Sukadeva Goswami, Sutta Goswami, the Shaunaka Rishi, all these sages, Naimisharanya, Vidura, Maitra, they're not speaking random verses just because they felt like giving a poetry, or speaking poetry or reciting poetry. They have no interest in speaking, or they have no business in speaking stuff that is not true, because the Śrimad Bhāgavatam is the ultimate truth, separated from illusion. So that is what these verses are about, and that's what Srila Shukadeva Goswami and Sutta Goswami is talking about. They're simply interested in describing the reality of this material world, of the spiritual world. They're not interested in gaining praise by chanting nice verses by a holy river in the assembly of other sages and munis. That's not the point. So we also have to carefully understand the deeper meaning of these verses, and only then will we be able to understand what the Śrimad Bhāgavatam is about. If we simply just, like Prabhupada describes all these, what is the exact word that he uses? Professional reciters of Śrimad Bhāgavatam who do the Bhagavat Saptahas. They're simply reciting just to gain some monetary remuneration. They're not devotees, so they don't know the meaning of Śrimad Bhāgavatam, the goal of Śrimad Bhāgavatam, and the purpose of why we read Śrimad Bhāgavatam. They don't know that. They simply recite it in the association of other non-devotees and just simply waste time. And they just cause so many offenses to the holy name. So, the same way we just read all these 9 verses, clouds raining pus, dogs wailing, planets going retrograde. So just because all these descriptions are not in our experience doesn't mean that they're not true. There's so many things out there that we don't see or we can't understand, but that doesn't mean that they're not true. For example, simple thing like air. We don't see it, we can feel it, but we can't see it. But we know it's there. Intelligence, that's there. The mind is also there. We can't see these things, but they're there. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean they don't exist. So atheists, after reading these verses, they might just be like, oh, yeah, okay, this is some great poetry. Must be some sort of mythology or imagination of some crazy person who had nothing better to do. So we have to be very careful against such people and not listen to their version of Śrimad Bhāgavatam from there, because they have very limited experience and their intelligence is not purified whatsoever. And same way, because their intelligence is not purified, they can't seem to understand how Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and how he performs his wonderful pastimes, like lifting Govardhan Hill for 7 days on his left pinky finger. No one can do that. No human being can do that. No demigod can do that. Brahma cannot do that. Shiva cannot do that. So what makes people think that they are qualified to do such a thing? What makes them think that they're God? So such misguided intelligence is what causes them to deny the existence of God, and they just assume that, oh, okay, yeah, sure, it must be mythology. So Krishna didn't actually lift Govardhan. I can lift Govardhan myself. I just need to do some mystic yoga first, and then I'll get to the same level. But that's absolute nonsense, because Krishna did not become God. First of all, he did not become God. He's always God. And second of all, he didn't gain his powers by doing some mystic yoga. He was completely full with them at all times, because everything comes from him. Both material and spiritual. Aham sarvasya prabhu mattah sarvam pravartate. There's everything that is spiritual and material comes from me only. That's what he says in the Bhagavad Gita. So we should take it as it is, not change or add or subtract anything from what Krishna has said, because it takes away the absolute absolutity? No, what is the word? It takes away the absoluteness? No, English is failing me today. Okay, anyway, absoluteness of the scriptures. So we should just read it as it is, and that's exactly what Srila Prabhupada has done for us. He's presented the Bhagavad Gita as it is, Śrimad Bhāgavatam as it is, Chaitanya Charitamrita as it is, Nectar of Devotion as it is. No addition, no subtraction. So modern scientists, they like to add, subtract, divide, multiply, whatever they want to do, they do to understand the laws, the scientific laws of nature. But it's so funny, we see that they're trying all these things, they're doing their additions and subtractions, and trying to understand material nature, but the only thing that's happening is that they're moving further and further away from material nature. The more they try to understand material nature, the further they're moving away from it, and they're ultimately failing. They're making some progress here and there, but in the ultimate sense, they're really not going anywhere. And to the degree that they're trying to understand material nature, to that same degree, they're moving away from it because they don't believe in the truth of how material nature was created, what it is, how it reacts, under whose direction it works, under whose command it's moving and controlling the living entities. That they don't understand. And so we also see that nowadays the nature itself has changed. Material nature is constantly changing. And that's what Krishna describes in the third verse of the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that this constantly changing environment is what is called Prakriti, material nature. And even in simpler terms, we can understand that back in the day when we didn't have so many big buildings in New York, forget New York, any other city, when the cities were not so developed back in the day, you could hear the howling of dogs at night, you could hear dogs fighting at night, you could hear the pin drop silence sometimes, you just didn't hear anything. But nowadays, because of modernized Ugra karma, or advancement in material science, there's constantly noise to the point where we can't even hear a dog bark. In New York City, I hear more ambulances and police sirens and honking than I hear human beings or dogs or animals, or even birds for that matter. I don't remember the last time I heard a bird chirp in New York City. I think I had to go to Central Park to even see a squirrel. They just don't live here. In the temple, we have is different kinds of animals, the ones that we don't want here, but the ones that we do want, they're not here. Exactly. Wildlife is like practically extinct in New York City, and other cities are catching up. Because they have this conception of material progress is more important than their holistic whole being or their spiritual progress, and this can only go on for so long until people just go crazy. And that time is coming. It's not very far away. And this so-called progress that material scientists are making, it's not really progress because they set up all these warning systems, all these precautionary measures, all these alarms to predict against natural disasters, but they still can't protect themselves from the natural disasters. You can have all the systems you want, but if they're not protecting you, then what's the point? Or even if they do alert you at an early time, some people still die. So they're not really helping. They're just writing big books and writing all these theses and assumptions and laws and theories. But at the end of the day, they can't solve the problems of material life, which Prabhupada emphasizes over and over again, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. And devotees, we don't really care about how the material nature. We don't try to control the material nature. We simply try to understand how it works. Who's controlling it? The who controlling part is what we're more interested in, not how it works. How it works, we understand. We get a little bit of understanding, but then who's behind it is what interests us. And the problem with the material people is that they are trying to become Purusha. They're trying to become the controller of material nature. But they fail to realize that they are Prakriti themselves. They are products of the material nature, at least their bodies are. And because they're thinking on the bodily platform, they're simply trying to compete with material nature and trying to lord it over the material nature, but they can't understand the basic science is that they are not Purusha, they are Prakriti. Jivera Swarupaya Krishnera Nityadas. And why is this? Why is it that we are eternal servants of Krishna? Because Krishnera Tatashta Shakti Bheda Bheda Prakash. Because we are just the products of the marginal energy of Krishna. We are just like small atomic particles on the sun rays. This is what is described in the Madhya Lila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So devotees, they're more focused on the controller of material nature. They're more focused on the energetic, not the energy. They don't care about the energy because there's no point in worshipping the energy. We respect them, respect the energy, but we don't worship the energy. So we should take serious note of this message, because back in the day, millions and millions of years ago, two yugas ago, one Muni or one Brahmana was able to predict the outcome of two demons just from the time, the circumstances, and the place of how they were conceived. But now practically everyone is a demon in this modern age. And we see that these demons that are everywhere, the asuras, they're simply exploiting the material nature. But devotees, like I said before, we understand how she works. We're trying to understand how Krishna is controlling the material nature, how everything is moving under his will. Because at the end of the day, the devotees are trying to find out the ultimate truth. They're not trying to find out any intermediary truth, anything that is below the absolute truth. And what is this absolute truth? This absolute truth is Ishvara Krishna, Ishvara Paramaha Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha. This cause of all causes is Krishna. Sarva Karana Karanam. That's Krishna. Nothing moves without him. Not even a blade of grass can move without him. So what to speak of this whole Mahatattva, the material nature, Prakriti, all these things. How is it moving? How are the planets moving? If a blade of grass cannot move without his permission, how can the sun give us sunshine every day? So everything is controlled, and devotees know this, but the scientists, they don't know this. And all their knowledge is useless until they understand that Krishna is the cause of all causes and he is everything. So Krishna is the explanation behind all the unexplainable. And also in material nature, we see so many wonderful things happening constantly, but we don't stop and think like, wow, how is this actually happening? Who's the cause behind it? I cannot do this, so how is it happening? It doesn't happen with my body, but it's happening here. Like we see a small seed, maybe red in color. If you throw it on the ground, water it properly, it takes the same water, the same sunshine that's available, and it grows into, let's say, a mango tree or banyan tree. And on the same hand, if you take another small seed of a different color and we just toss it and do the same exact process, give it the same water, same sunshine, it will grow into another tree of a different kind. So how is this happening? How is there so much variegatedness in material nature? That is a question that the scientists cannot answer. They think that this whole world was created for some explosion, from some fragmental chunk that exploded at some certain point of time, and then we all came into being. And then someone goes even further to say that we evolved from monkeys and whatnot, and chimpanzees. But it's all incomplete. It's partially somewhat correct, but not entirely true. But devotees, we don't take interest in anything that's partially true or half true or not true. We simply look at the absolute truth, the ultimate truth, and that's Krishna. And this ultimate truth, the devotees, we don't look at this ultimate truth as such, as a controller. We don't see Krishna as a controller. We don't come worship Krishna every day because, oh my God, he's a controller, so let me worship him. No. We worship him because he's the cause of all causes. That's a better way to worship Krishna than to simply worship him on the platform of all, like, oh my God, he's controlling me, so I have to offer my obeisances to him, otherwise I will go to hell. No. You have to do it with love. You have to understand that he is the cause of all causes, that if I don't serve him, if I don't love him, if I don't devote my life to him, then it's gonna work against me. But if I become his devotee, if I offer my obeisances unto him, if I always think of him, then that will satisfy him and that will satisfy me. And the Śrimad Bhāgavatam is full of such explanations, full of such descriptions by so many stalwart devotees. There's the 12 Mahajans, then there's pure devotees like Kunti Maharani, then there's Parikshit Maharaj, Shukadev Goswami, there's Dhruva Maharaj, Prithu Maharaj, Rishabdev. They've given so many verses, they've given so many prayers, Prahlad Maharaj, just to show us that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everything is coming from Him. He is the cause of all causes. And like in the Krishna book, on the 10th canto of Bhagavatam, there's example of Jambavan fighting in the cave with Krishna. He's fighting, at that time he was the most strongest living entity. And he got into a fight, he was trying to fight with Lord Krishna over a jewel, the Simantaka jewel. And he kept fighting with Krishna for, I think, 28 days or 27 days, something like that. And he was getting tired and tired and tired, but Krishna was not getting affected whatsoever. So he eventually came to understand that he could subdue everyone else, but he could not subdue this person. Who is this personality? Cannot be anything material, so it must be something more powerful than me. The only thing that's more powerful than me is the Supreme Lord, my Supreme Lord. And then he understood that it was Krishna. So in devotees, they try to compete with material nature, but eventually they understand that they can't compete with it, and it's Krishna who's behind everything. They come to that understanding. But other people, the karmis, especially the karmis, they never get to this understanding, and they will never come to this understanding unless they get the mercy of a pure devotee. So this whole conception of God that the material people have is that He doesn't exist, or that we ourselves are the controllers. That's not really what the Śrimad Bhāgavatam is talking about. It's talking about the exact opposite. And time again, this is what the pages of Śrimad Bhāgavatam are describing to us, that Krishna is the cause of all causes, not us, not material nature. Everything is coming from Krishna. Krishna is the cause of all causes. He is the one who is controlling material nature. Maya dakshena prakriti suyate sachara acharam hetunanina konteya jagad viparivartate. Like Krishna, the material nature is working under Krishna's direction. And all living entities, moving and not moving, are controlled by that. So we have devotees, we have to understand with a sober mind that to understand all this information in Śrimad Bhāgavatam, we have to understand it with a sober mind. And we have to come to the mode of goodness, the platform of sattva. Otherwise, in this age of Kali, it's going to be very, very difficult to understand what Śrimad Bhāgavatam is trying to tell us, because Kaling sattva haring hi pungsam, that all good qualities are stolen in the age of Kali. There's no good qualities left, or even whatever is left, it's slowly declining. They won't last very long, so we have to make the best use of the limited amount of intelligence, memory, body power, age of life, all these things, we have to make the best use of it. And the best use of all this is to worship the Supreme Lord. And this is why devotees are called Kovidas. Tasyeva hetu prayateta kovido nallabhyate yad brahmatam uparyadaha tallabhyate dukkavad anyatasukam kalena sarvatra gabhira ranghasa. So devotees, they understand that there is no better happiness than serving the Supreme Lord. Even after going through all the planetary systems in the world, they understand that serving and becoming a devotee of Krishna is the highest, most occupation, or the use of time. And this spiritual understanding can only come to devotees by serving their spiritual masters. It is not possible for devotees, or to speak of non-devotees, to understand the verses of Śrimad Bhāgavatam without the help of a spiritual master. Without Prabhupada, we would not understand the word of Bhāgavatam. There's so many translations of Bhāgavatam out there, but they're so inaccurate and so misleading. The whole prayojan of the Bhāgavatam is derailed, and it's changed. So there's no point in reading Bhāgavatam from someone who's not a devotee, who's not a pure devotee. But Prabhupada, he spent the whole of his end periods of his life giving us Śrimad Bhāgavatam. And we have to take shelter of such pure devotees, because Jivan chavo bhagavatangri renum najatu matyo bhilabheta yastu. Whoever has not had the dust of a pure devotee on his head is considered to be a dead body. So anyone who simply had some association with a pure devotee, or senior devotees, or Prabhupada's books, they are considered to be lucky. They're considered to be Kovida, because they have that guidance, they have that that skeleton holding their whole spiritual life together. And that's Srila Prabhupada, that's our spiritual masters. So many senior devotees, all the sannyasis in ISKCON, they're all there for that same reason, to guide us, to help us, to understand that spiritual life is not about just what we think it is. There's a certain way to do it. And as long as we follow Srila Prabhupada's way, then we'll perfect our spiritual life in this life and then go back to Godhead. And one may ask, how do we approach such a spiritual master or such a pure devotee, and how do we get their mercy? That's what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadikshyanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. 3 things we have to do. Pariprashnena. Panipatena, first we have to approach the guru or the devotee very humbly, and then we have to do pariprashnena, which is submissive inquiry. It's not that we just walk up to them and like, hey, you, give me the answer to this question. I have so many questions, I need the answers. No, we do we approach them nicely, humbly, and then slowly we ask them that this is our question. But the third way, and the third part, and the most important part is sevaya. We have to serve them. We can't just expect them to give us knowledge. Knowledge is only comes down through service. Without service, we never attain any knowledge. Whatever we think we attain without service, that's not knowledge, that's concoction. And we always have to be engaged. To get knowledge, we always have to engage ourselves in service to the guru or to the pure devotees. Even if Vapu is not possible, then Vani is so much better than Vapu. But some people, like myself, I prefer Vapu more than Vani. So I'm always looking for Vapu time with Maharaj. But that's been difficult lately, so I'm taking shelter of his Vani, Srila Prabhupada's books, and that's the only way we'll really survive in spiritual life. Spiritual life, we can't just coast through it for the rest of our life, because that's terrible. That's a terrible idea. We have to constantly endeavor for new levels of understanding in spiritual life, new realizations. And that only comes by service and service to the Guru and by reading Srila Prabhupada's book. And the orders of such spiritual masters should be taken as the life and soul of one, and just wear this order that they give us as a crown jewel on our heads. Only then will we make progress in spiritual life. So this understanding of spiritual matter in depth only comes from serving the Guru. It doesn't come in any other way. So through this service, we can distinguish the 3 different kinds of bodies that we have: the gross body, the subtle body, and the spiritual soul that's within us. This distinction will only arise, or we'll only realize it when we serve. And our intelligence will only get purified when we serve. So we must understand that we cannot go back to Godhead without service to the Guru. Not just we do whatever service we feel like is right. It must always come from a higher authority, and this is what the Śrimad Bhāgavatam describes as well. And eventually, through this service, through this surrender, we will understand that these verses of the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, it's not mythology, it's not imagination, it's not concoction, it is the truth, the absolute truth. It's reality distinguished from illusion. That's what Śrimad Bhāgavatam is. It's the perfect Amala Purana. It's the perfect scripture. It's a cream of all Vedic literatures that Vyasadeva composed in his maturity. Not that he just did it in the beginning of his life and titled it the best creation of me. No, he truly realized everything. And then he spoke it to his son, Shukadeva Goswami, who also realized it perfectly. And he spoke it to Maharaj Parikshit. And Maharaj Parikshit also realized it perfectly. And he went back home, back to Godhead in 7 days. So we just have to surrender to Krishna. And this is exactly what Arjuna did in the Bhagavad Gita. Up to the 6th verse, or half of 7th as well, of the 2nd chapter, he was just talking about how to please himself. He was trying to please his senses, please his desires, rather than trying to please Krishna and achieve Krishna's desires. And then he says, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava prichami tvang dharma samuda chetaha yashayasya nishchitam bruhitan me shishyastahang shadi mam tvam prapannam. So, Krishna, I have this miserly weakness that I can't help it, and I finally surrender myself unto you. So this Karpanya dosha, we all have this. And that karpanya dosha comes in many forms and types. And one of the forms is that we think we know better than our spiritual master. We think that we don't need their help. We don't need the guidance of senior devotees. We don't need the guidance of pure devotees. And this works against us, because when we surrender and we inquire from them through service, that's the best use of our intelligence. And then it doesn't become karpanya. Then we become brahmanas, because we are looking for the higher purpose, higher goal. So asking for help in spiritual life is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of intelligence. And this is exactly what Arjuna did. And when he did this, his whole life changed. He understood that all his family members, his kin, his wife, his brothers, his relatives, his sons, they're all just part of a bigger plan, being controlled by Krishna. Whether or not he participated in the war would not have changed the outcome. They would have died anyway, and Krishna already did that simply by glancing over them. He reduced their lifetimes, and so all Arjuna had to do was become an instrument in Krishna's mission. Nimitra bhavam sabyasachi. I forgot the exact line. But that's what Arjuna became. He became an instrument. So we should also become an instrument in our spiritual master's mission, in Srila Prabhupada's mission, and help him expand this movement of Krishna consciousness in any way we can, in any way that we're capable of. If whatever qualities or talents we have, we must engage it in this mission, and that's the best use of our talents and time and energy. And I think that's it. So, Hare Krishna. If there's any questions or concerns, we have 5 minutes to discuss.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. Prabhu, I had a question. In this section of verses and a lot of Śrimad Bhāgavatam, the idea of inauspicious planets appearing and omens, devotees or other personalities, they're reading the omens, like, oh, we see these bad omens. Even when Krishna was born, I think Kamsa was seeing so many things. And as devotees, we don't get heavily involved in astrology. We don't necessarily, look into that very much, or we don't even really read omens. But you see it a lot in the Bhagavatam. And should we be looking at our astrology, and should we be checking for omens as we do stuff?
I'll give my little humble opinion first, and then Maharaj can expand on that. So up until 3 days ago, Friday morning, 8:45 a.m., I was under this firm conviction that we don't need astrology. Astrology is just a material science that we don't really need in our spiritual life, because we're chanting Hare Krishna, and chanting Hare Krishna will transcend everything that we're doing. But the harsh reality is that we're still in material bodies. We're all conditioned, and we're conditioned by astrology. This body that I have is due to my previous karma, and it was determined to my astrology at that certain time that I was conceived by my parents. So simply saying, oh, I'm chanting Hare Krishna, I don't need to look at astrology, that's what I believed up until 2 days ago, because of this harsh truth that we have not perfected our life yet. We're in the process of perfecting it, but we haven't perfected it. Once we perfect it, then we can forget all this astrology and stuff. But I'm not saying that we should make astrology our prime focus and put Śrimad Bhāgavatam aside and then look at astrology now. No. Astrology is there. We have to understand what we are, like who we are, as in like what our material predisposition is. We can't ignore that, because we're serving to this material body, to the body, the mind, and our words. We're serving Krishna like that. So simply saying astrology is material, we don't need to focus on astrology, I don't really believe in that anymore. I think we all need to understand that we all have a certain nature, and that nature, if it's conducive to spiritual life, we should continue with that. Or if it's not, then we should try to see how we can work around it and do better in our spiritual life. So, Maharaj wants to say anything.
Well, in a basic way, astrology is there, But it's not an exact science in our modern day, because there are a lot of factors and there's a lot of missing aspects of the science of astrology, and that's why modern astrologers you have to take them with a pound of salt, Prabhupada one time explained that there was a very famous astrologer in India, and he died in the back of a taxi cab in a traffic jam. So Prabhupada made that point saying he was a great astrologer. He didn't know that he was going to die in a traffic jam in the back of a taxi cab. So if he'd been worth his salt as an astrologer, obviously he would have been able to predict that event, but he didn't, On the other side of the coin, we know that there are omens, and all these things do figure in. It's just we're not able to predict in a very precise way. And anyway, we know that, there was one time on the street, I was doing Sankirtan in Queens, and a lady came by, a Caribbean lady, and she said, "Oh, you're a monk, so you tell lies." And I said, "What?" I said, "I tell lies?" And she goes, yes, I've heard monks always tell lies. And I said, "What?" And then I realized she was saying they tell lives, not lies. And so that she was, wanting me to tell her what her future was. I said, well, birth, death, old age, and disease. So, yeah, so instead of, I didn't hear it properly. And of course, there's kind of that Caribbean dialect where there's certain words that aren't exactly the word that we would use in regular English to say that. But, the idea is there that we know in general how things are going to happen. And, astrology is exact if you have all the details, but most people don't have the details, and even astrologers are unable. The Ayurveda is the same way. There's so many missing pieces of it. I've had, even Ayurvedic doctors tell me that, it's an incomplete understanding in our present day. Mm-hmm. Lots of things have been lost through the years. As far as astrology goes, there's devotee, she's married to Konteya, and I forget what her name is right now, but she wrote a wonderful book called How to Mess Your Life Up with Astrology, and she's an astrologer, so she talks about, how people think that it's just some mechanical system, and if you're in the right place or you do things in the right way, you can get your desired material result, but that's not how the material universe works. The material universe is working under its own law of cause and effect. And if you really want to make your life better, you engage in purifying processes under the direction of a spiritual master. In other words, you engage in devotional service. Then your life will become better, and it's guaranteed. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you won't die tomorrow, but on the other side of the coin, it doesn't mean that astrology is really about those people who are not interested in following the Supreme. For them, you can, to some extent, chart out what will be the future for them, because Prabhupada in many cases also verified astrology, that it's actually a science. But at the same time, once a person takes to spiritual life, then Krishna is manipulating their life in a very specific way. And from an astrological point of view, it's sometimes said that this is the Vishnu Graha, the word is there, mm-hmm. the planet of Vishnu, which is an invisible planet. And it ameliorates or mitigates the influences of the other planets in a way that's impossible to predict. So I had a devotee friend once that went to an astrologer to get his future read, and the astrologer was shocked. He said, "You should be dead." But he obviously wasn't dead. So I think that this gives us an understanding that karma is like a closed system. It's like a mathematical system. It's like a mechanical system. And astrology relates to that mechanical, that mathematical, that closed system. But outside of astrology is the Supreme Lord himself, who can play with any of those aspects as he desires. And when a person becomes a devotee, they answer to that system and not really the astrological system. Sometimes people, engage in studying astrology or teaching astrology to create an interest in those in the outside world. That's another, thing that can be done, that people in the outside world are interested in astrology. So by learning astrology, they come into contact with those who will teach them about the demigods, about consciousness, about karma, because through talking about astrology, it brings you in contact with the concept of karma. And that's where you can use astrology as a platform to explain karma.
Thank you, Maharaj. Any other? Oh, too late. Okay. Śrimad Bhāgavatam ki. Srila Prabhupada ki. All glories to the